Arrived for my father's birthday dinner, but my stepmother met me at the door and said, "We're keeping it small this year, just immediate family." My father stood behind her and didn't say a word. My son whispered, "But Grandpa's my best friend." I took his hand, turned around, and drove us straight back to the hotel. 3 hours later, I canceled the credit card I let them use for luxury shopping, withdrew the down payment I gave them for the new Tesla, and booked flights home. By morning, my stepmother was calling nonstop, and my father texted, "You've made your point. Can we please talk?" I still remember the exact moment my world shifted. Standing at my father's front door with my 8-year-old son Henrik beside me, holding a carefully wrapped gift and wearing his best shirt because Grandpa's birthday is special, Mama. The drive from Copenhagen had taken 4 hours, but Henrik had chattered excitedly the entire way about seeing his beloved grandfather. My father, Magnus, had always been the center of our small family universe. After my mother died when I was 16, it had been just the two of us for years. We built a relationship that felt unbreakable, or so I thought. When he married Ingrid 3 years ago, I genuinely tried to welcome her. She was elegant, well-spoken, and seemed to make him happy after years of loneliness. But there had been signs. Small things at first. Comments about how some people didn't understand proper family dynamics. Suggestions that maybe I was too dependent on my father. The way she'd redirect conversations when I called during their dinner time. I dismissed these as adjustment issues. Blended families took time, I told myself. The morning of his birthday, I'd felt optimistic. Henrik had spent weeks making a photo album at school, carefully drawing borders around pictures of him and his grandfather fishing, playing chess, building model planes. My father had been a consistent male figure in Henrik's life since his father walked out when he was 2. They had a bond that transcended typical grandparent relationships, they were genuinely best friends. I'd booked us into a nice hotel in Aalborg for the weekend, planning to make it a proper celebration. The trunk of my BMW was loaded with gifts, including an expensive watch I'd saved months to buy. Henrik had even packed his chess set, hoping for their traditional tournament. When Ingrid opened the door, her smile was perfectly polished and completely cold. "Oh, Astrid," she said, not moving aside to let us in. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding." Behind her, I could see the dining room table set for exactly 4 people. Through the kitchen doorway, I glimpsed my father's sister Emma and her husband Lars. No place settings for Henrik and me. "We decided to keep things small this year," Ingrid continued, her voice carrying that particular tone wealthy women perfect, pleasant on the surface, steel underneath. "Just immediate family." The words hit like a physical blow. Henrik's small hand tightened in mine, and I felt him step closer to my leg. Behind Ingrid, my father appeared. 63 years old, still handsome in his pressed shirt and good trousers. The man who taught me to drive, walked me down the aisle at my wedding, held Henrik in the hospital the day he was born. He said nothing. "Dad?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. Magnus looked at his shoes, then at Ingrid, then anywhere but at me. "Well, you know how it is, love. Ingrid's organized everything, and..." He trailed off, leaving the sentence hanging like a noose. That's when Henrik spoke up, his 8-year-old voice cutting through the adult tension with devastating clarity, "But Grandpa's my best friend." The silence that followed felt eternal. I watched my father's face crumble slightly, saw him glance down at Henrik with something that might have been regret. But still, he said nothing. He stood there, my father, this man I'd adored and trusted my entire life, and chose his wife's cruelty over his grandson's broken heart. "Right then," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We'll be going." I turned Henrik around gently, my hand on his shoulder. He didn't protest, but I could feel the confusion radiating from his small body. As we walked back to the car, I heard Ingrid's voice behind us, bright and fake, "Sorry for the confusion. Perhaps next time we can all coordinate better." The drive back to the hotel passed in heavy silence. Henrik stared out the window, occasionally sniffling. I kept my hands steady on the wheel while my mind raced with hurt and growing anger. At the hotel, I ordered room service while Henrik lay on his bed, still clutching the photo album he'd made. He kept looking toward the door as if his grandfather might still appear. "Mama," he finally said, "did I do something wrong?" That's when the hurt crystallized into something harder, sharper. Fury, perhaps. Or justice. "No, sweetheart," I told him, pulling him close. "You did nothing wrong. Nothing at all." After Henrik fell asleep, I sat in the hotel's business center with my laptop and phone, staring at the screen for a long time. Then I began making calls. First, the credit card company. The supplementary card I'd given my father and Ingrid for emergencies had seen quite a bit of activity lately. Ingrid's weekly spa appointments, her shopping trips to Stockholm, expensive dinners at restaurants I couldn't afford. The card had a limit of 50,000 kroner, my entire emergency fund. "I need to cancel this card immediately," I told the representative. Fraudulent activity. Next, I called my bank. The down payment for my father's new Tesla, 200,000 kroner I'd liquidated from my mother's inheritance, could be recalled. It hadn't been a gift, technically. I'd structured it as a family loan with no repayment schedule, thinking I was being generous. But loans could be called in. I need to initiate an immediate recall of funds, I explained to the night manager, someone I'd dealt with before during my divorce proceedings. Family loan, no formal agreement, but I have documentation of the transfer. The third call was to the airline. Our return flights weren't until Sunday, but I changed them to Saturday morning. We'd be gone before my father even woke up. Finally, I called my lawyer. Eric was a friend from university who'd handled my divorce and understood complicated family dynamics. Astrid? It's past midnight. Are you all right? I explained the situation briefly. Eric listened without interruption. The credit card recall will be immediate, he said when I finished. The Tesla down payment might take 48 hours, but given the circumstances and your documentation, it should go through. Are you sure about this? This isn't something you can easily undo. I looked toward the bedroom where Henrik slept, still wearing his good shirt, still clutching his grandfather's gift. I'm sure. By morning, my phone was buzzing constantly. Ingrid's number appeared again and again on my screen. I let them all go to voicemail while Henrik and I packed our things and checked out. The first voicemail was bewildered. Astrid, darling, there seems to be some issue with the card. Could you call me back? The second was irritated. The Tesla dealership is saying there's a problem with the payment. This is quite embarrassing. Please call immediately. By the fifth, her voice had lost all pretense of warmth. What exactly do you think you're doing? This is completely inappropriate behavior. Your father is beside himself. Then came the text from Magnus. You've made your point. Can we please talk? I showed Henrik the message while we waited at the airport. He was old enough to understand the basic situation, and I'd always believed in being honest with him. What do you think, little man? Should we talk to Grandpa? Henrik considered this seriously, the way he approached everything important in his 8-year-old world. Did he say sorry for hurting our feelings? I read the message again. No, he didn't. Then maybe he's not ready to talk yet. The wisdom of children. On the flight home to Copenhagen, I finally listened to my father's voicemail. His voice was strained, older somehow than it had been just 24 hours earlier. Astrid, love, I know you're upset, and perhaps we handled things poorly. Ingrid feels terrible about the misunderstanding. She says she tried to explain that it was just. Well, you know how these things go. Could we try to work this out? I hate having you angry with me. And Henrik, the look on that boy's face. Please call me back. I deleted the message. Over the next week, the calls continued. Ingrid's tone evolved from confusion to anger to panic as the financial realities set in. My father's messages grew increasingly desperate. The first few days were almost comical in their predictability. Ingrid's voicemail started formal and condescending, as if she were addressing a misbehaving child rather than the woman who'd been subsidizing her lifestyle. Astrid, this little tantrum has gone far enough. Your father is quite distressed, and frankly, this behavior is beneath someone of your education and background. Please call me back so we can resolve this misunderstanding like adults. But as the days passed and the financial implications became clear, her tone shifted dramatically. The spa had called about her missed appointment. Apparently she'd been a regular, charging 2,000 kroner sessions to my card every Friday. The boutique in Stockholm where she'd ordered a custom wardrobe for spring had started calling about payment for pieces already in production. You have no idea what you've done, she hissed into my voicemail by day 4. Do you understand the commitments that were made based on that credit line? The embarrassment you've caused? Magnus has worked his entire life, and he deserves better than this vindictive behavior from his own daughter. I found myself studying these messages like fascinating anthropological specimens. The entitlement was breathtaking. In Ingrid's world, my generosity had somehow become her right, and my withdrawal of that generosity was a personal attack rather than the natural consequence of her cruelty. My father's messages told a different story. Where Ingrid's calls were all about money and social embarrassment, Magnus seemed genuinely bewildered by the magnitude of what he'd lost. His first few messages were tentative, almost hopeful. Astrid, love, I know we need to talk. Perhaps I could drive down this weekend? We could sort this out over dinner, just the two of us. I know Henrik loves that restaurant with the toy trains, maybe we could all go there? The casual way he mentioned Henrik broke my heart all over again. As if nothing had changed, as if his grandson would simply bounce back from being rejected and humiliated because of toy trains and familiar surroundings. I learned later, through my aunt Emma, exactly what had happened after we left. Emma had a talent for extracting information. She'd been the family's unofficial intelligence network for decades, somehow always knowing who was struggling, who was fighting, who needed help or intervention. The atmosphere at dinner was dreadful, she told me during one of our regular phone calls. Emma lived in Aarhus, close enough to Magnus to stay informed but far enough away to maintain perspective. After you left, Ingrid tried to pretend nothing had happened. She kept making bright conversation about the meal, complimenting her own cooking, acting as if excluding you and Henrik had been a perfectly reasonable social decision. And Dad? Your father barely spoke. He kept looking toward the door as if he might come back. Lars tried to ask about Henrik, you know how he dotes on that boy, and Magnus just deflated. He couldn't even explain what had happened. Emma paused, and I could hear her brewing tea in her kitchen, the familiar sounds of her evening routine. Ingrid finally got frustrated with the mood and made some comment about how some people can't handle family dynamics and how she was only trying to create an elegant atmosphere. That's when Magnus spoke up. What did he say? He said, my grandson calls me his best friend, and I just let someone turn him away from my door. Then he got up from the table and went to his study. Didn't come back out. The credit card had been maxed out the very morning of the birthday dinner. Ingrid had planned a shopping trip to Stockholm the following week, a 3-day excursion she'd been planning for months, complete with personal shopping consultants and reservations at expensive restaurants. The Tesla was supposed to be delivered that Thursday. Magnus had apparently been bragging about it to his colleagues for weeks, explaining how his successful daughter had insisted on buying it for him as an early retirement gift. He was so proud, Emma said sadly. He kept saying how generous you were, how lucky he was to have a daughter who'd achieved so much. I think he genuinely saw it as proof that he'd raised you well. Instead, he'd had to call the dealership Monday morning and explain that the payment had been recalled. The conversation, according to Emma who heard about it through Magnus's neighbor, had been excruciating. The sales manager had been confused, then suspicious, then coolly professional as Magnus tried to explain that there had been a family misunderstanding about the financing. The car went back to the lot that afternoon, Emma continued. Magnus had to take a taxi home because Ingrid refused to pick him up. She said she was too embarrassed to be seen at the dealership. The Stockholm trip was cancelled next. Ingrid had booked premium hotels, made dinner reservations at restaurants that required months of advance notice, arranged private shopping appointments at boutiques that catered to wealthy clients. The deposits lost in cancellation fees alone amounted to several thousand kroner. But it was the everyday expenses that seemed to hit hardest. The weekly spa appointments, the premium grocery shopping, the casual dining at expensive restaurants, all of it had been charged to my card for months. Faced with the reality of financing her lifestyle on Magnus's modest pension, Ingrid had apparently become, in Emma's diplomatic phrasing, quite difficult to live with. She's barely speaking to him, Emma told me. And when she does, it's to remind him that this is all his fault for not managing his family better. Those were her exact words. She keeps saying that in her previous marriage, her husband would never have allowed family members to interfere with their household decisions. I felt a flicker of satisfaction at that, followed immediately by sadness. This wasn't the father I'd grown up with. The Magnus I knew would have never allowed anyone to treat his family this way. But as the days passed, I began to understand something more complex about my father's situation. Through Emma's updates and my own reflection, I realized that Magnus hadn't just made one terrible decision at his birthday dinner. He'd been making small compromises for months, maybe years, each one seemingly insignificant but together forming a pattern that had led to that moment at his front door. She isolated him gradually, Emma observed during one of our conversations. It started with little comments about how much time he spent on the phone with you and Henrik. Then suggestions that maybe family visits should be coordinated better. She convinced him that she was trying to help him maintain better boundaries, make his retirement more peaceful. I remembered the signs I'd dismissed. The way our regular Sunday phone calls had become less frequent. How Magnus had started asking if it was convenient to visit rather than simply announcing when he'd arrive. The gradual reduction in his presence at family gatherings, always with reasonable explanations that seemed to originate from Ingrid's social calendar. She made him believe that choosing her preferences was the same as being a good husband, Emma said. And she framed any resistance as him being disloyal to their marriage. It's a classic pattern, really. Isolate the person from their support network, then become their primary source of emotional validation. This realization complicated my anger. I was still furious with my father for his cowardice at the birthday dinner, but I began to understand that the man who'd stood silently behind Ingrid wasn't entirely the same person who'd raised me. He'd been systematically diminished, his confidence in his own judgment eroded by someone who benefited from his dependency. Meanwhile, Henrik was struggling more than I'd initially realized. The rejection at his grandfather's door had shaken something fundamental in his 8-year-old worldview. Children that age believe in fairness with an intensity that adults forget, and what had happened violated his basic understanding of how family was supposed to work. Maybe I was too loud at Grandpa's house before, he said one evening while we were doing his homework. Maybe I should have used my inside voice more. The self-blame was devastating. I knelt beside his chair and turned him to face me. Henrik, listen to me carefully. You did nothing wrong. Nothing. The way you behave, the way you talk, the way you play, all of that is perfect exactly as it is. What happened at Grandpa's house was about grown-up problems, not about you. But if I was quieter, maybe Ingrid would have liked me better. Sweetheart, Ingrid's feelings about you have nothing to do with who you are as a person. Some grown-ups have problems that make them act badly toward children, but that's never the child's fault. Still, the damage was visible. Henrik became more subdued at school, less willing to speak up in class or join playground games. His teacher, Mrs. Larson, called to express concern about the change in his behavior. He seems to be questioning himself more, she explained. Instead of jumping into activities the way he used to, he hangs back and watches to see if he's welcome. It's heartbreaking, really. He's such a bright, enthusiastic child normally. I made an appointment with a school counselor, a gentlewoman named Sophie who specialized in helping children process family transitions. After several sessions, she gave me insight that proved crucial. Henrik is dealing with what we call conditional love anxiety, she explained. He's learned that someone he trusted completely, his grandfather, could suddenly become unavailable to him based on circumstances beyond his control. Now he's wondering if other relationships in his life might be equally unstable. What can I do? Consistency. Predictability. Keep reinforcing that your love for him doesn't depend on his behavior or other people's approval. And be honest about the adult problems without making him feel responsible for fixing them. These conversations with Henrik became a nightly ritual. We'd curl up on his bed after stories, and he'd ask questions that revealed the complexity of his processing. Do you think Grandpa still loves me even though he didn't choose me? I think Grandpa loves you very much, but he made a bad choice because he was confused about what was most important. Will you ever make a bad choice about me? I might make mistakes, sweetheart, but I will always choose you. That's what mothers do. Even if I marry someone someday who doesn't like you? The sophistication of the question startled me. At 8, Henrik was already working through the dynamics that had destroyed his relationship with his grandfather. If you marry someone someday who doesn't like me, we'll figure out how to handle that together. But I would never ask you to choose between me and someone you love, and I'd hope your wife would never ask you to choose between her and your family. So Ingrid asking Grandpa to choose was wrong? Yes, it was wrong. And Grandpa choosing her was wrong too? Yes, that was wrong too. These conversations were painful but necessary. Henrik was learning important lessons about relationships, boundaries, and self-worth that would serve him throughout his life. But I grieved for the innocence he'd lost, the unconditional trust in family that had been shattered by adult failures. By the end of the second week, the situation at Magnus's house had deteriorated significantly. Emma called with updates that painted an increasingly grim picture of my father's marriage. Ingrid's sister came to visit yesterday, Emma reported. Apparently, she'd been looking forward to seeing the new Tesla and having Ingrid treat her to that fancy Stockholm shopping weekend. When she learned about the cancellations, there was quite a scene. According to Emma's reliable network of neighborhood contacts, Ingrid had been forced to explain to her sister, and by extension, her entire social circle, that her stepdaughter had withdrawn financial support due to a family disagreement. The humiliation had been unbearable for someone who'd spent months cultivating an image of affluent respectability. The sister apparently said some very harsh things about Magnus's inability to control his family, Emma continued. She suggested that perhaps Ingrid had married beneath her station. It was loud enough that the neighbors heard it through the windows. I found myself feeling almost sorry for my father, trapped in a marriage that had revealed its true nature under financial pressure. Almost. How is he handling it? Poorly. He's lost weight, looks exhausted. I think he's starting to realize what he's traded away, but he doesn't know how to fix it. Pride, maybe, or fear of admitting such a massive mistake. The breaking point came during the third week, and it wasn't what I expected. Magnus had been trying to maintain some normalcy, still going to his weekly chess club at the community center, still meeting his old colleague Niels for coffee on Thursday mornings. But Ingrid had become increasingly controlling about these activities, viewing them as unnecessary expenses and questioning why he needed social contact outside their marriage. The crisis occurred at the chess club. Magnus had been playing the same group of men for 15 years, a collection of retirees who gathered every Tuesday evening to play matches and discuss politics, sports, and their grandchildren. Magnus had always been the most enthusiastic grandfather in the group, frequently showing photos of Henrik and sharing stories of their adventures. According to Niels, who called me directly after it happened, Magnus had arrived at chess club looking haggard and distracted. When the conversation turned to grandchildren, as it always did, the other men began asking about Henrik. How's that grandson of yours, Magnus? Still beating you at chess? When's he coming to visit again? My grandson would love to meet him, they're about the same age. You must have some new pictures. That boy changes so fast. Magnus had broken down completely. Right there in the community center, surrounded by men who'd known him for decades, he'd started crying and couldn't stop. He told them everything, Niels explained during our phone call. The birthday dinner, Ingrid's demands, how he'd stood there and let his grandson be turned away. He was sobbing, Astrid. I've never seen a man cry like that. The chess club members, practical men in their 60s and 70s who'd lived through their own family dramas, had responded with surprising gentleness. They'd helped Magnus to a quiet corner, brought him water, and listened as he poured out the whole story. They were furious, Niels continued. Not at Magnus, well, they were disappointed in him, but at the situation. Several of them have been through divorces, remarriages, blended family issues. They understood how these things can spiral out of control. What did they tell him? Old Johan, you remember Johan, the one who used to be a ship captain, he looked Magnus straight in the eye and said, Son, you can get another wife. You cannot get another grandson. And that boy won't be 8 years old forever, waiting for you to come to your senses. That night, Magnus had apparently gone home and confronted Ingrid directly. Not about the money, that bridge had already been burned, but about the fundamental issue that had caused everything else. He told her that he wanted Henrik and you to be welcome in their home again, Emma relayed the next day. He said that his family was non-negotiable, and if she couldn't accept that, they needed to reconsider their marriage. Ingrid's response had been volcanic. According to the neighbors' reports, filtered through Emma's intelligence network, the argument had lasted hours and involved considerable shouting. Ingrid had accused Magnus of being manipulated by me, of allowing his spoiled daughter to control his decisions, of choosing chaos over the peaceful life she'd worked to create for them. She told him he had to choose, Emma said quietly. Her or us. She said she wouldn't live in a house where she had to compete with his previous family for attention and resources. And what did Dad say? He asked her to leave. The words hung in the air between us. After months of compromises and capitulations, after allowing himself to be gradually isolated from the people who loved him most, Magnus had finally found his backbone. But the victory felt hollow. I wasn't ready to forgive him, and I wasn't sure Henrik was ready to trust him again. The damage had been done, and asking Ingrid to leave didn't automatically repair the hurt he'd caused. Still, it was a beginning. Henrik was at school, which was probably for the best. I invited Magnus in but didn't offer coffee. We sat in my living room, the silence stretching between us like a canyon. I've made a mess of things, he said finally. I waited. Ingrid. She had very specific ideas about how the birthday should go. She felt that including too many people would make it chaotic, less elegant. She wanted it to be special. By excluding your grandson? Magnus winced. She didn't see it that way. She thought Henrik might be disruptive. Children at formal dinners, you know. It was a family birthday, Dad. Not a state dinner. I know that now. He rubbed his face with both hands. God, Astrid, the look on Henrik's face. I've been seeing it for 2 weeks. I can't sleep. Then why didn't you say something? Why did you just stand there? The question I'd been carrying like a stone in my chest for 2 weeks finally emerged. Magnus was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because I'm a coward. Because I've gotten comfortable, and Ingrid. She can make life very difficult when she's displeased. And because I convinced myself that you'd understand, that we could fix it later. I thought. He paused, struggling. I thought our relationship was strong enough to weather one disappointing evening. It wasn't about one evening, Dad. It was about you choosing her comfort over your family. Over Henrik. I know. We sat in silence again. I could hear children playing in the courtyard outside, their voices bright and carefree. It made me think of Henrik, who'd been unusually quiet since the birthday weekend. He asks about you, I said finally. Henrik. He wants to know if Grandpa still loves him. Magnus made a sound like he'd been punched. Of course I love him. He's. God, Astrid, he's the light of my life. You both are. Then why didn't you choose us? It was the simplest question and the most complicated one. Magnus stared at his hands for a long time before answering. Because I'm selfish. Because at my age, I was afraid of being alone again. Because Ingrid makes me feel young and wanted, and I didn't want to risk losing that comfort. And because I made the mistake of thinking that your love, both of yours, was unconditional. That no matter what I did, you'd forgive me. The honesty was brutal and necessary. Well, I said, you were wrong. I know. He looked up at me then, and I saw my father clearly for perhaps the first time in years. Not the heroic figure of my childhood, but a flawed, frightened man who'd made terrible choices. The money. Taking it back. It was fair. More than fair. I know you could have let us struggle to figure out what happened, but you made your point immediately and clearly. It wasn't about making a point, Dad. It was about consequences. Actions have consequences. Yes. He nodded slowly. They do. Magnus stood to leave, pausing at the door. Is there any chance you might forgive me? Eventually? I considered the question seriously. The man standing in my doorway was my father, the person who'd raised me, loved me, been my anchor through my mother's death and my divorce. But he was also the man who'd broken his grandson's heart and stood silently by while it happened. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe. But not today. And not until you figure out what kind of man you want to be. He nodded, accepting this. And Henrik? Henrik is 8 years old. He loved you unconditionally, and you hurt him badly. If you want a relationship with your grandson, you need to earn it back. From him, not from me. After he left, I called in sick to work and picked Henrik up early from school. We went for ice cream and talked about complicated things like love and disappointment and forgiveness. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, I told him. Even grown-ups we love very much. Did Grandpa make a mistake? Yes, he did. Will he say sorry? I don't know, sweetheart. I hope so. 3 months later, Magnus called again. This time, his voice was different, steadier, more like the father I remembered. Ingrid and I are separating, he said without preamble. It should have happened weeks ago, but I suppose I needed time to accept that I'd chosen the wrong person to prioritize. I didn't say anything immediately. I know this doesn't fix what I did, he continued. And I know it doesn't erase Henrik's hurt or yours. But I wanted you to know that I've learned something important: a comfortable life isn't worth a meaningless one. What are you going to do? I'm going to try to become the man my grandson believed I was. The father you deserved. I don't know if it's possible at 63, but I'm going to try. It was a start. The road back wasn't quick or easy. Trust, once broken, doesn't repair itself overnight. But Magnus proved his commitment in small, consistent ways. He moved to a modest flat closer to Copenhagen. He called Henrik every Tuesday and Thursday evening, just to talk about school and chess and model airplanes. He asked permission before visiting, respected boundaries, and never once mentioned Ingrid or the complications she'd brought to our lives. Most importantly, he apologized. Not just to me, but to Henrik, with a kind of sincere, complete apology that acknowledged exactly what he'd done wrong and why it had been hurtful. I chose someone else's feelings over yours, he told his grandson during one of their supervised visits. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. You are one of the most important people in my life, and I failed to show you that when it mattered most. Henrik, being 8 and possessing the remarkable forgiveness capacity of children, accepted this apology with the seriousness it deserved. It's okay, Grandpa, he said. But next time, can you choose me? Every time, Magnus promised. Every single time. Today, a year later, Magnus and Henrik are rebuilding their friendship. It's different now. Henrik is more cautious, less automatically trusting, but perhaps that's not entirely a bad thing. He's learning that love doesn't mean accepting poor treatment, that standing up for yourself is sometimes necessary even with people you care about. And Magnus is learning that respect and love aren't the same thing, that true relationships require choosing each other actively, repeatedly, especially when it's difficult. As for me, I learned that financial independence isn't just about personal security, it's about having the power to enforce your values. The money I withdrew, the credit card I canceled, these weren't acts of revenge. They were acts of self-respect. They were me saying, if you don't value our relationship enough to treat us with basic consideration, then you don't get to benefit from our generosity. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's worst behavior. Sometimes walking away is the only thing that creates space for real change. My father and I are still rebuilding too. It's slower going with adults, we have longer memories and more complicated pride. But we're trying, and that matters. The birthday gift Henrik made, the photo album with the carefully drawn borders, sits on Magnus's coffee table now. He shows it to anyone who visits, explaining that it was made by his grandson, his best friend, the boy who taught him that love without respect is just comfortable selfishness. It took a broken birthday, a cancelled credit card, and a recalled Tesla down payment for my father to learn what my 8-year-old son knew instinctively: real family means choosing each other, especially when it's hard. Every time.